Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Ever since I was a child, I have been fascinated by airplanes and pilots. What's it like to fly from the cockpit of one of those massive chunks of metal called an airplane? Fortunately, I know just the guy to talk about all things involving being a commercial pilot. Dan Jacobson has spent his career as a pilot and has flown for many years as a captain with United Airlines. He's flown several different types of airplanes, including 747s, 737s, and currently 777s. He flies all over the world, and just last week, he flew to Japan. As you'll hear, he loves his work and is able to speak candidly about what it's like to fly millions of miles in the cockpit with the joys as well as the challenges, including flying after 9/11. In addition, he provides some life hacks around traveling and adjusting to time changes. And very importantly, he provides data about the safety measures taken by the airlines. He shares how airplanes themselves are extremely safe and strong, which may provide some comfort to people who fear flying. So join Dan and me as we explore the life of a commercial pilot. Dan Jacobson, who has given me clearance to call him Danny, welcome to Super Psyched.
Thank you very much, Adam. It's great to be here with you.
Oh, I'm so excited. You know, very early on when I even had this podcast as a thing in my imagination, I knew I wanted to interview you. Flying is such a fascinating thing. The idea of you having flown as many miles as you have, which I'm going to ask you to quantify at some point to the best of your estimation. But, you know, so many kids fantasize about being a pilot. And I know that you fantasized about it as a child too, but you actually did it. And I was wondering, how did you decide to become a pilot?
So I always wanted to be a pilot. Both of my parents were private pilots. They flew little airplanes. So as long as I can remember, I would fly both my dad and my mom. And so unlike most of my friends who on a weekend, when their parents said, what do you want to do? They wanted to go play with their friends or go to the beach. My answer was always, I want to go flying. So my first flight with my dad was when I was 2 weeks old. And of course, my mom held me. And I have literally been flying ever since.
Yeah. So you've been doing this since you were 2 weeks old. So it's always been a part of your consciousness. I remember even at one point you described to me that you'd be sitting in Little League Baseball out in the outfield looking at airplanes rather than the game.
That's very true. Yeah, I'd be in the outfield looking up at an airplane flying over and my buddy is going, Dan, pay attention.
Get back in the game. I imagine you were thinking, oh, I want to be on that thing.
I was going, who's flying that? What kind of airplane is it? Where are they going? Why am I not flying it?
That is awesome. What are some of the skills that are required to be a good pilot?
Well, it's good to be proficient in math and the ability to think on your feet, make decisions. And we're also human resource managers. You know, I'm flying a 700,000 pound airplane with 350 passengers and up to 15 flight attendants with 3 other pilots. We interact with dispatchers and mechanics and ramp agents and chief pilots. So the ability to not just fly the airplane, but to manage people effectively is critical.
I love that. So you're one part technician, one part coach. So it requires both those technical and people skills to be a really good pilot. So what are some things that might surprise people who aren't pilots about being a pilot?
It seems like being a pilot to a lot of people that don't fly is somewhat mysterious. But of course, we are just normal people that have the affliction of loving airplanes. The reality is that we are completely normal people. We are a subset of society with all the exact same issues as the world. But on the other hand, we are extremely fortunate as airline pilots, for most of us, to be doing what we love, that we absolutely love, and we get paid for it.
That's so cool. And what is the average flight day like for you in terms of the schedule, in terms of your preparation, in terms of the behind the scenes for preparation to get on the plane and getting on the plane and getting off the plane?
That's a big question. And I work for a very large airline that has many, many different types of airplanes with very different types of flying. And I've been around my company for 25 years. So I happen to fly the Boeing 777. So my flying is completely different than somebody that flies the 737 or the Airbus. But what I do is I almost exclusively fly international flights. So I'll start off all my trips from San Francisco. And usually I fly the airplane out of San Francisco, but occasionally I'll deadhead. I'll just sit in the back of the airplane with the passengers and I'll fly to another airport where the trip actually starts. And my world has been rocked like everyone else's as a result of the pandemic. So whereas before the pandemic, it was extremely consistent. Flying was very consistent. We flew to the 10 or 12 destinations around the world that we always flew to. And we almost always started by flying, not by deadheading. But when the pandemic hit, the company had to scramble and change the way that we operate. So now there's much, much more deadheading around the world, either to the United States or over to Guam or Narita, Tokyo. So it just depends what I'm doing now. So as far as a typical day, first of all, a typical month, I work about half the month. I am usually scheduled to fly about 15 days out of a 30-day month. Once a month in the month prior, we bid for our next month's schedule. So I will put in my requests, and based on seniority, we are awarded flying trips. So I know about 2 weeks before the next month what I'm doing in the next month. So on the day of my trip, we typically show up an hour and a half before our departure, and we'll meet with the other pilots. Usually I fly with either 2 other pilots or 3 other pilots, depending on how far we're going. We meet in our operations room at the airport, and we'll review the weather information, airplane information, and get to know each other. I don't always know the guys and the women that I'm flying with. So once we're all happy, we talk to our dispatcher, who is the guy that actually planned the flight and put together our information packet. And we make sure that we're all on the same page. And then we go out to the airplane and we divide up our duties. So there's typically 2 guys that are flying the airplane, and 2 of the pilots are relief pilots. So the 2 flyers will sit down in the cockpit and get everything ready on the airplane side. And then the relief pilots, one of the pilots will take care of anything in the cabin that needs to be addressed. And the other pilot will walk around the outside of the airplane and make sure everything's good outside. Then they interact with the flight attendants. And then just probably 30 minutes before we actually depart, we are all up in the cockpit, we brief and get ready to go.
That is the coolest thing. This is the coolest thing. I've flown a gazillion times. I had no idea that was going on behind the scenes.
There's a lot going on.
And one of the pilots walks and does a visual inspection of the plane before takeoff.
Always.
That is reassuring and so cool. And there are 4 people up there, and especially on a long haul like SFO to Narita, which I imagine is about 12 to 16 hours. I forget how long it is.
Yeah, a little bit less, but yes, it's almost 12 hours.
Okay, it's almost 12 hours. Yeah. I used to fly a lot to Osaka from here. And I know you've landed in Kansai Airport, which is a man-made island in the middle of Osaka Bay, but that's for another story, which is just so legendary to me. You're all doing different duties at different times. And I also imagine that there's conversation that transpires in the cabin because you're human after all. And what is conversation like with your colleagues as you're flying?
So, of course, we are always talking, but during those very, very busy times, for instance, while we are getting everything ready, it tends to be pretty businesslike. And then there are certain times that we're actually restricted from having any kind of extraneous conversations. So, for instance, when we are pushing back, starting the engines and taxiing out for takeoff, we are actually prohibited by regulation from having extraneous conversations. And basically from any time we're moving on the ground through 10,000 feet, it's all business. Above that, then we can have personal conversations. When we reach cruising altitude, the autopilot's on and we're flying along. But yeah, we talk about everything, and I am meeting new people. So I'm having a conversation with a guy or woman that I know is very much like me, but I've never met before. Because we all tend to have very similar personalities. And so I'm always fascinated to find out who I'm flying with. And it usually starts off by finding out where they're from. Less than half of the pilots that are based in San Francisco actually live in the Bay Area or even in California. So many of them commute in. So this trip I just came back from last night, one of the relief pilots lived in Fargo, North Dakota. And so it was great talking to her.
When we say similar personalities, how would you describe the personalities? What's the confluence?
Well, first of all, we all have an addiction and a love of flying. We tend to have studied some science-based subject in college. A lot of the pilots are former military. I'm a civilian. We tend to be type A personalities. We tend to be technical, a little bit anal, but that's the underlying stuff. And then, of course, each of us has our own interests. A lot of guys are into cars, guns, airplanes, boats, you name it.
Stuff that moves fast.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And I'm just imagining the bond that you feel. It's like you're describing some preconditions that kind of lead everybody to the cockpit that is in common. What's it like in terms of the delta between, say, a civilian and a military pilot? Are there differences there?
Well, I suppose of course, the military pilots all have a common experience. They all went through the exact same process in the military. And then they all had significant responsibility as officers operating multi-million-dollar airplanes and nuclear capable airplanes. So they've got this common bond and experience. The civilians have a similar common bond because we all had to jump through hoops in order to get the experience that it took to get to our job at the major airline. Almost everyone went to college. We all built our flight time somehow by flight instructing, flying for regional airlines, flying for other airlines. So that gives us our common bond. And then overall, both civilian and military, of course, we just have the aviation thing in common.
That's cool. And you describe the pilot as being somewhat anal. And I remember in graduate school learning that having certain obsessive compulsive traits were really helpful for graduate school. And I imagine having those obsessive compulsive traits in the cockpit is similarly very helpful because there are a lot of things you need to pay attention to at any given time. I'm wondering, what is it like to know that you are basically responsible for the lives of so many people on any given flight?
Of course, you're always aware that that, for instance, I've got 350 people behind me, but honestly, I am equally as diligent and safe and anal, whether I'm flying my 777 or my Cessna 172, because ultimately the end result can be excellent or not excellent.
Yeah. And have you ever been scared?
Primarily just driving to and from work. Yeah. So seriously, I mean, I've had a lot of things happen. I've had engines quit on me in the jet, and that's the rare. Usually the problems are not mechanical. Usually we have issues in the back with medical issues, but we are highly trained by the airline, and we go through recurrent training every 9 months where they catch the airplane on fire, they kill engines on us, they shut off radios. We also practice medical scenarios. So we did this over and over. We have amazing standard operating procedures. We have checklists. And so these things come up and we just deal with them. And it's what we do. Being scared, honestly, doesn't even come up on the radar screen. No pun's intended.
That's awesome. So as you well know, people who don't fly airplanes, I'll call them muggles like me, using a Harry Potter term, when the slightest turbulence is hit, some people respond to it as like, wow, this is fun, like being on a ride. And other people, like me, think, oh my gosh, this is terrible. No matter how much I learn about it, it's still really anxiety producing. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts of turbulence from the viewpoint of the cockpit?
So unless it's significant, really bouncing things around, I don't even think about it. Although I think about it in terms of keeping everyone safe. So As soon as we start getting the ripples, we try to decide or determine whether it's enough that we need to turn the seatbelt sign on and put the passengers down. And if it's enough that we need to put the flight attendants down. So as far as worrying about turbulence that it's going to do any kind of damage, these airplanes are amazingly strong. And I include everything from Piper Cub to 747. They are amazingly strong. They're designed to work in the air. Turbulence is just not something that's going to hurt the airplane. The risk for everyone is if you don't put on your seatbelt when there's turbulence. I'm serious. I see you smile, but if the airplane even drops 3 or 4 feet and you're not attached, you're going to stay where you were, and the airplane's going to be move 3 feet away from you. So, and that's not good.
That's not good.
Yeah. So you need to have your seatbelt on.
Right. And I'm wondering, what can, a pilot do to reduce the turbulence or to reduce the exposure to it?
So first of all, when we flight plan, several of the charts that we look at, the weather charts, depict turbulence. So we can see areas that they're forecasting. The air traffic control is forecasting turbulence. So we can avoid those areas. Also, when we're en route, we look outside, we can see the weather. And depending on the type of clouds that we're seeing, cumulus clouds tend to have turbulence, whereas stratus clouds, the smooth, flat clouds, they are typically smooth. So we can avoid flying through or near cumulus clouds. Certainly thunderstorm clouds will have turbulence. Also, we talk to other airplanes. So when I talk to air traffic control, when I check in, I will often check in and say who I am. And I just announce what the ride is. So it's a smooth ride, or we're getting light turbulence, we're getting moderate turbulence. And everyone's listening. If I hear somebody else say, I've got moderate turbulence, then I might ask, where is that guy? And air traffic control will tell me. So it's a robust system.
So there's an old Jackie Mason joke where he describes the idea that driving, as we all know, is far more dangerous than flying. And yet no one ever got into a taxi cab and started clapping when they arrived at the destination. They will clap in an airplane. And we all know that statistic that flying is so much safer. And yet, what do you attribute the fear of flying from where you sit on average? Why is it that we clap when the plane lands? Why is it that we are so awestruck or full of fear if we are fearful on planes?
I think that most of us are control freaks in general. And when you're sitting in the back of the airplane, you can't see me flying the airplane. And it's a mystery. Some invisible people are up there with your life in their hands. And so I think it's just giving up control, and nobody likes that.
I think you're spot on. It's that relinquishing of control piece. I think you're spot on. So what's it like for you when you deadhead from SFO to O'Hare on the way to, so you're flying in the back of the plane just like us. What's it like?
Well, it's wonderful because I know that they're well trained. I know exactly what they go through every 9 months in the simulator. I know that every time that I get in the cockpit and meet a new pilot, I know what to expect from them. They know what to expect from me. And I feel the same way when I'm in the back.
That's so cool. So let's hear about some of the basic functions of life from the perspective of the cockpit. Sometimes you will get to take a rest and maybe even sleep on an airplane. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah.
Where do you sleep, and how do you make sure that you fall asleep on a plane? Because falling asleep on a plane is hard.
Okay. So on domestic flights, my answer is no, we don't sleep. And we're not allowed to sleep. On long flights, anything over 9 hours now, we bring an extra pilot. Anything over 12 hours, we bring 2 extra pilots. So that would be, for instance, San Francisco to Narita, we'll have 1 extra pilot. If I fly to San Francisco to Sydney, that's a 14-hour flight, we'll take 2 extra pilots. So in that case, on my airplane, we actually have a bunk facility. It's above first class. So there's a door with a stairway that takes me upstairs, and we sleep above the first class section. Inside that room, there are 2 chairs that they're not quite first class chairs. They're comfortable. And then behind that, there are 2 bunks. They're not quite twin size beds, but they're comfortable beds. And so I'll have sheets, and blanket, and pillows, and I'll make my bunk, and I will literally go to bed.
That is so cool. And I'm guessing there are no windows.
No windows. Nope. We got lights.
Yeah. And you have to strap yourself in case of turbulence.
There is a seatbelt in the bunk, and I tend not to put it on unless we hit turbulence. just because it's uncomfortable when I roll over to have a seatbelt on me. But the bunk's not very tall. So if the airplane bounces around and I'm not strapped in, there's not much headroom. So I won't go very far.
Wow. And I'm guessing there are other people who are snoozing at the same time. It's like,
so upstairs in that bunk room, there are 2 beds because there's as many as 2 pilots taking a break. In the back of my airplane, there is a flight attendant break room because the flight attendants take breaks also. And there are 6 bunks back there.
wow, we just would never know this.
And as far as falling asleep, depending on which job you're doing, whether you're the flyer or the relief pilot, we try to prepare for sleep. So the relief pilots sleep first, typically. So they will try to show up to work ready to go to sleep. And the flying pilots will fly the first half of the flight where they will show up well rested. And then halfway through the flight, we swap and then go to bed. I'm extremely fortunate that I have no difficulty going to sleep when I lay down. I am blessed with sleep apnea, so I wear a CPAP. And if I put that CPAP on, it triggers me to go to sleep and I'm out cold. It's wonderful.
Oh, that's great. And I'm guessing that you would vouch for us who endorse sleep, that sleep is a really important thing when it comes to performance, including in the cockpit.
Absolutely. We focus on that constantly. We talk about fatigue because we deal with time zones and fatigue all the time. So it's a big deal for us.
So what are some tips that you could give us travelers who are deeply impacted by visiting time zones and even daylight savings? I mean, there's a spike in road accidents and all kinds of effects of the deleterious aspects of not sleeping well. What are some of your life hacks around sleep and time changes?
When it's extreme, like going over to Asia or over to Europe, Middle East, I would say, first of all, don't drink alcohol. Secondly, try to use the sun to help you. So when the sun is up, go outside and move around and stay awake. I kind of think back to when our daughters were babies. And I remember being up at 3 or 4 in the morning, feeding them and wondering how in the world am I going to make it through the next day?
Totally.
And then the sun comes up and I go outside and I'm awake.
Yeah, that was one of the things I learned during my many trips to and from Japan was to wake up with the sun and make sure I was setting my clock with the sun.
And the other thing is, as soon as you get on the airplane, set your clock to where you're going. And all of a sudden, if it's 9 o'clock where you're going, 9 o'clock p.m., go to sleep. Don't stay up and watch movies.
That's great. So you're taking off from SFO at, let's say, 12 noon, and you know it's 9 p.m. where your destination is.
Right.
You go to sleep. You don't binge watch a whole bunch of stuff. Wow.
Exactly.
That's a great tip. What about hydration and needing to go to the bathroom as a pilot? Airplanes are notoriously dehydrating entities, and yet I'm guessing that as a pilot, you don't have the luxury of being able to get up and go to the bathroom whenever you want. How do you maintain that perfect balance of being hydrated and tending to that personal need?
You're right. It's very dehydrating. I try to drink at least a liter of water every 8 hours. So I overhydrate while I fly. Our flight attendants are very good to us. And so if we do need to go to the bathroom, we call them, and usually, almost always, they'll drop whatever they're doing to let us get a break because we are held captive up in the cockpit these days.
I would think. How about with regard to eating? Like, how do you make sure you're well fueled there?
So we get fed at least one meal on a flight. On the flights that I do, we'll have as many as 3 meals scheduled. So the company boards meals for us when the airplane is catered, and then we'll eat when it's time to eat. I never eat 3 meals. I'll typically have 1, maybe 2.
And do you do like Cliff Bars on the side? Like, how do you keep yourself in the game?
Yeah, I don't tend to eat too much. We do a lot of sitting in the cockpit. I eat what I need to eat, not extra, because we do a lot of sitting in the cockpit.
To a muggle like me, I walk into the cockpit and I see a gazillion, what feels like an overwhelming number of meters. It's the dashboard that is so beyond my comprehension. I can't even understand that all of these things actually even have a use. But what are all those things? So
when you come into the cockpit and you see on the instrument panel, there's instruments in front of us. those are primarily used to allow us to fly the airplane without reference to the outside. So we don't need to see the horizon. We can fly at night, we can fly in clouds, and we know exactly where we are. Everything else, all the instruments, all the switches on the overhead panel, in old airplanes, there was actually a flight engineer behind the pilots. All those other switches are so that we can monitor and control all the aircraft systems. We have electrical system, fuel system, hydraulic system, pneumatics. So we have to be able to make sure that everything's working properly and control them as necessary.
And from the cockpit, I imagine you get some spectacular views at times. What are some of the most beautiful things you've ever seen?
One of the most beautiful things I've ever seen is flying through the Midwest of the United States at night. And there'll be lines of thunderstorms that stretch hundreds and hundreds of miles. So we fly alongside these things for at least an hour, and they are producing lightning like you have never seen. It's just an endless show of the power of nature, and it is spectacular. 2 trips ago, I flew from San Francisco over to Frankfurt, and in northern Canada, I had the most spectacular display of the northern lights that I have ever seen. It was just this brilliant green lights flying through the sky. It was incredible.
That sounds just visually like, I'm guessing you've seen just so many things over the course of your, by the way, how many miles would you estimate?
Well, I have 23,000 flight hours. So if we average 300 or 400 miles per hour, including my slow airplanes in the beginning, that's a big number.
It's about 9 million, 10 million miles flown. And what you also said was counterintuitive to us non-pilots, that in order to get to Frankfurt, you have to fly. I mean, we look at a globe and we think, oh, you fly over the United States, but actually you go north, so to speak, and fly over Canada.
Yeah. And actually, if you actually have a globe in front of you, what you do is you take a piece of string and put one end on San Francisco, the other end on Frankfurt, and pull it tight. And you'll see that string doesn't go across a straight line. It goes up and over the globe. And we call that a great circle route. So that's actually the shortest distance over a 3-dimensional surface.
Have you stepped foot in virtually every continent?
No. I have flown to North America, Asia, Europe, Australia, South America, no Africa, and no Antarctica.
Got it. What's it like for you to travel with your family? Do you find yourself wanting to get on an airplane to go traveling and go someplace?
I find that I want to take them with me all the time, but I will admit that as a person that travels for a living, when I am not working, I love being in my house.
I imagine. When you're out visiting a city, do you get time to actually explore the city?
Yeah. So typically we have anywhere from 24 to 48 hours wherever we're going. And so although it's not like a normal vacation where you get to spend a week somewhere, I definitely go out and try to see as much as I can. Of course, this is in non-pandemic times. In pandemic times, depending on where you go, there are significant restrictions. A lot of the places I fly to right now, I cannot leave my hotel room. And then some places I can leave the room, but I can't leave the hotel. And in other places, I actually can go outside. So it depends on where I'm going.
And post 9/11, what was that like? I imagine that was really hard on you.
But yeah, that was pretty significant. So coming back from 9/11, just like anyone who traveled, we were all hyper aware of our surroundings, and security all of a sudden became a real issue that people focused on. But I felt like we were all pulling on the same end of the rope for the first time in my career. And I felt like passengers had our backs as crew members, and we certainly had their backs as the crew. Yeah, it changed everything. And then the airlines, of course, were just devastated financially as a result of 9/11. And that led to my company ended up going to bankruptcy, as did many other airlines. So financially and stress-wise, it changed things very much for the worse shortly after 9/11.
I imagine. And do pilots carry a gun?
Yeah, there are pilots that do. So there are federal air marshals. They're not pilots. They're actually federal law enforcement that fly on the airplanes. And there's a program for pilots to carry.
Got it. One of the things that you alluded to is that you have continuing education hours. And I know in my profession, we have that as well. So when you became a commercial airline pilot about 28 years ago, the number of things that you've had to learn since then to stay current has been massive. And so I'm guessing that in order to know what you needed to know, you spend, as you were describing, like you said, every 9 months, you're doing flight simulations, you're going through all types of things. What is the continuing education process like?
We have 2 different types of recurrent training. One will be kind of a review, just proficiency training. So we just go through and we'll do engine failures and the things I talked about earlier. They'll throw fires at us. We'll review all the safety equipment on the airplane. And that's not really a check ride. That's literally just proficiency training. The next 9 months we'll come back and we will actually be tested. We will have a real check ride doing all those things.
Actually in an airplane in real time?
No, sorry, in a simulator.
Got it.
Yeah, and the simulators are so realistic that it doesn't make a difference to us whether we're in the airplane or the simulator. We are effectively flying the airplane. Of course, you're always safe.
Right.
We do things in the simulator that it would be imprudent to do in an airplane.
That's really cool. And you're able to really respect both your skills as well as the tool of the airplane itself through the simulator and know what its limitations are without incurring any risk.
Yeah. And then as time goes on, we have hot topics and we have issues that come up in the real world that the company and the FAA want to emphasize for us. Unfortunately, the accidents happen. We're always addressing the last thing that happened. It's very difficult for us to forecast next accidents that's going to happen. So the FAA and the company look at the issues that led to the last accident and they emphasize those things with us. So we're constantly adding to the things that we are actively watching for. But as a result, the industry is getting safer and safer all the time.
That's really comforting. I guess my second to last question, at least, would be, this is a demanding job. I know you're used to it, so it's all good. 23,000 hours. You are quite accustomed to what the job demands. And yet you described the desire to kind of be at home and to have some quiet there. How do you apply self-care between flights and what would be optimal?
I try to relax as much as possible during, the time that I'm either on a layover or at home. And I focus on my interests that have nothing to do with my job. And that's one of the beauties of what I do is that when I land, I'm done. I don't have to sit there and think about my next flight until it's time to think about my next flight. And I can then focus on the things that interest me. And I don't have to worry about flying the airplane until an hour and a half prior to my next flight.
That's really cool. What are some of those things that really float your boat?
Well, I really enjoy reading. I've been a voracious reader of World War II history, and I've taken up baking. So I'm a pandemic baker. When I'm at home, I pull out my starter and do some baking. And I'm planning on getting bees. I want to become a beekeeper in the spring. So yeah, just things that have nothing to do with airplanes.
Except, of course, they fly.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
So I imagine there is at least one skill that applies to being a pilot that would be really useful for the masses of people who don't even fly. And I wonder if you had the magical ability to confer upon all people that skill. What skill would that be that pilots really rock? And what do you imagine would be the outcome in people's lives individually and collectively?
Well, there's a lot of skills, but I think that overriding all things that you could possibly do as a pilot is just a dedication to and a sense of responsibility for what you're doing. You just have to take it seriously. And of course, that would be helpful for everyone in all walks of life. But yeah, we can't be 99% good. If we were 99% good and 1% of the time we failed, there'd be a lot of airplanes that did not successfully arrive at their destination. Our operation is ridiculously safe because we train and we have a tremendous sense of responsibility and exercise it.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing is accountability and responsibility leading to excellent outcomes when flying is really the key.
Absolutely.
And I can really hear it in your conviction. Well, Danny, I am so grateful to you for taking time to share with my listeners your experiences as a pilot, the wisdom you've accrued over your 23,000 hours of flying. And I just feel your enthusiasm for it. And as a person who flies a lot, but never really feels super comfortable relinquishing my control to the person in the cockpit, I am so much more comforted to know that the way you describe the strengths and the virtues and the skills of a pilot, this is very comforting to me, is to put it mildly.
Well, I'm glad that I could give you that sense of comfort. And anytime that you're on the airplane or anyone listening to this, before we take off, you are welcome to come to the cockpit and say hello. And if you have concerns or any questions, pilots love talking about flying airplanes. So come on up and say hello.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Dan.
It is my pleasure.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.